Betting, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Bet with the Best podcast. Its mission is to explore better ways to bet on races, to seek out new, successful players, and to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. The Bet with the Best podcast is sponsored by Amwager, an ADW built by horse players for horse players. Speed, power, and ease of use are at the core of Amwager, designed to give players the information and tools they need to quickly make anything from a simple win bet to a complex, structured superfecta or pick 5 wager. When you combine that with data and pool updates that are up to 60 times faster than the competition, Amwager is the clear winner in wagering on races online. Those are just a few of the many special features that Amwager has to offer, along with live video and race replays, free, integrated form-to-win past performance information, conditional wagering, and true odds, which are a prediction of off odds based on all available pool data. That and much more. Amwager is licensed and operated in the U.S., and best of all, they will actually pay you to play. If you sign up now and deposit and bet $150, you will earn a $150 lump sum bonus. So there is no reason not to give Amwager a try. If you want to bet with the best, then you need the best tools to wager with. You need Amwager. Welcome to part 2 of episode 27 of the Bet with the Best podcast. In part 1 of the podcast, we talked to Ryan Flanders about how to watch races and how to take notes and what's important and what's not. And in part 2, we will continue that conversation with Ryan with more discussion about watching races and how you can use that information to become a better horse player. So there's one thing we haven't really touched on, and it kind of is a combination of jockeys and horse comfort, and that is the whip. You haven't really mentioned the whip. It's a big part of horse racing, and jockeys carry them and use them. How do you factor, the whip into your trip notes and race watching?
It's not a factor, I don't think. I don't factor it really at all. I know which jockeys. I know how they ride. I'm more about that than I am about the crop. I'd tell you this: I think more races have been lost with it than won. I can tell when a horse is running well, when he's in rhythm. I think it should be used a little bit. I don't know. Yeah, it's not really a factor for me. It's not really a factor.
What about in terms of the way the horses respond to it or react to it? Is that something that you factor in?
It's difficult to quantify. Rarely do I see a horse do anything aside from veer in one direction or another. So they're running from it. But if I'm being totally honest, I don't. I think if you were to quantify it based on some sort of velocity metric, maybe to have that little cheeklet in their saddle, if you had a jockey that went from coaxing to an all-out shove, I don't know that you would get much more than if you went from coaxing to an all-out whip. I think horses, here's the reason why I think this, Chris, is, when I said horse racing was a worthy pursuit, the reason why I believe that is because thoroughbreds I do believe they're bred to do this. If you stuck 2 thoroughbreds in a field and you just left them out there, what are they going to do? They're going to race. They're going to run. They like to run. They enjoy it. They have a competitive spirit about them. And because of that, I do believe that the horses that are on the track are in the same way. We train them to do that, right? They're broken. They get to where they are. They know what they're doing. I believe they know what they're doing on the track, and the good ones are talented and they want to win. The average ones are not as talented and they want to win. The slower ones are less talented, but I think that they want to win. It's just the talent drops off a little bit, and it is what it is. But in my opinion, I don't believe that, if you're whipping and slashing a horse, they give you, I don't even know how many is six strikes, 8 strikes. I think it's 6. I don't know. If you gave them 12, would they run faster? I don't know. I don't think so. And frankly, I think a more skilled jockey he's going to know when it's time to burn that fuel, and the horse is going to perform better as a result anyway. I'm big on energy displays. And when the energy is being used in a race, you've only got so much gas. If you're driving a horse that's on E, empty he's on empty, that horse isn't going to keep going, and that's scientific. I mean, we're talking about lactic acid. I mean, it's just, oxygen in your blood. Like, look, the horse is finished. No different than you getting out on the track. And I'm like, Chris, just keep running. Just keep running, Chris. I don't care that you're tired. Look, they're not going to run. If a horse doesn't want to run, he's not going to run because he's tired. They're living, breathing things, animals, and they have a right to get tired. It's okay to motivate them to stay on, but I don't think it's a big difference maker. I can't tell you how many times I've seen. I mean, shoot, Irad lost the Preakness last year because of the crop. The Preakness. I mean, these guys, they drive horses to try to, intimidate other horses or hurt other horses. They hurt themselves a lot of time. I mean, quickest path to the finish line is a straight line, and these guys are moving all over the place. Just stay in your lane. You're going to run faster. Instead, I think sometimes they get caught up and all that. But don't get me down that rabbit hole. I'll start saying things I shouldn't be saying about riders.
No, I was thinking more of in terms of this horse. Doesn't it tends to shy, or it tends to veer left or right, depending if it's hit right-handed or left-handed, that sort of thing, as opposed to it's going to make the horse run faster or slower.
Okay. Yeah, and you see that. So, yeah, I mean, that happens, but, I mean, how do you – I don't think that's something you incorporate into your handicapping. At least I don't. You just know that it might happen, and you might see a horse that – I can't tell you how many times I've seen there's a lot of guys on this list that the horse is turning into the stretch, and he's getting ready to cut the corner, and he gets hit right-handed, and he lugs in pretty bad off the turn. And it costs him the race. I'll never understand jockeys that strike as a change is being made, either diving into the far turn or leveling into the stretch. Like, let that horse, he weighs 1,100 pounds and he's running 37.5 miles an hour. Let him get into the stretch. And then if you want to, drive him, that's fine. But if you get a horse he's turning left and you hit him right-handed, he lugs in off the turn, and you know that, and then you get on that same horse in his very next race and you do the exact same thing, that kind of stuff drives me crazy. And they do it, but how do you incorporate that into your playing? You don't. I don't. So it's not something
Would you make a note of that in terms of the trip? This horse lugged in because he was hit right-handed when he came out, when he's coming out of the turn?
Yeah,
as opposed to the horse just always lugs in. You know what I mean? He lugged in because he got hit right-handed. So it may not be chronic. Some horses, like Sierra Leone, just lug in, no matter what the rider does.
Yep.
Others react to the whip, and if the rider tends to whip right-handed, and he consistently does that, and the horse lugs in every time he gets hit right-handed. I don't know. Maybe this just it's not a big deal.
I mean,
that was kind of where I was.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think Tyler got beat up for this, and I think it was unfair. That horse is his own worst enemy. And it doesn't matter if it was Tyler or anybody else on that horse. He's moving in off the turn. So I think the only thing you can do, and I'd have to go back and watch that replay, but I'd rather chew glass than watch one replay if I don't have to. That horse is always moving in, and it may be that Tyler had it in his left hand and he was trying. I know that horse was lugging in bad, and you're trying to run fast, so you're doing your best to toggle in between riding him and keeping him from leaning in, which is slowing you down. It's the Kentucky Derby. This wasn't, a non-2 claiming race at Churchill Downs. It's the Derby. So he's trying his best to push forward and keep him from leaning in. Like, there's not a jockey on a planet that would have done any different in that race. And that horse is his own worst enemy. And we've talked about, who was it? Candied, she never switches leads. I don't think she ever will. I'm to the point now where I'm like, she's probably never going to do that. So certain horses do certain things. Some lug in, some lug out. Some don't change leads. It's probably not anything some of these guys can do that's going to change it.
But that's a really good lead in, because I wanted to talk a little about changing leads. Some of the listeners might not even know what you mean. So maybe if you think leads are worth spending some time on, talk about what we mean when we change leads, when they're supposed to change leads, how you can tell if they changed leads or didn't, and how important that is, if it's important.
Yeah, so I think it's important. The best analogy I ever heard, I think it was Migliori that talked about it, and I can't remember who it was, but I know it was one of the Naira crew, and I think it was for the Belmont. I can't remember, but the point is that the best analogy that I've heard about changing leads is, imagine you're walking at the airport and you're carrying a heavy bag and you've got it in one hand, and that hand and arm start to get tired. And so what do? You move the bag to your other hand. Pretty simple. And then you're suddenly refreshed, right? So that's all that is you've got a horse that, I don't know how many pounds per square inch they're putting on their lead foot when it hits the ground, but it's in the thousands. I want to say it's like 2,500 or 3,500 pounds per square inch of pressure. And that makes a horse tired. So when a horse, in the stretch, they're hitting the ground with their left foot first, and their right is following. And in the turn, they're planting their outside foot to help them to turn. So their right foot is hitting the ground first, and they change their lead depending on if they're running on the straight or if they're running on through the turn. So if a horse, switches leads in the stretch, it should give him a little bit more energy. I'll be honest with you, I think it's overrated. Depending on the horse, there are some that I think, oh man, if this one could ever change leads, I think this one could improve a little bit. But we're not talking about like multiple lengths of improvement. It's nominal, which in horse racing can be important, right? You're trying to win. Most races are decided by a couple lengths or less, and that's important. But most of them do change leads. Some of them actually don't change leads, and it doesn't seem to bother them. You can tell by how they reach. And I'm not going to tell anybody, you need to look for this. But the horse that doesn't change leads, and you can tell in their body language that it's hurting that horse by not changing. it's like looking at a guy that's working out and he's struggling. That the horse just looks tired, versus the horse that is really reaching, just throwing both of those legs out there and reaching. Some horses that don't change and finish well, they actually have a nice long fluid stride and they seem to run through it just fine. And I wouldn't say that a lead change would have helped them to improve, frankly, at all. But it's good to note for younger runners, if you're making notes on horses moving forward and you want to know, hey, is there upside here? Is the horse still learning? But if you see a horse and he's run 15 times and he doesn't change leads, do I care? Me personally, no, I don't care. Horses run 15 times. He's had plenty of time to figure it out. I mean, even Candy's run a handful of times, and I've given up on her changing leads. If she does it and wins, just because she's going to be better. But I'm done thinking, well, she can move up if she does this, because she's had her chances to do it and she hasn't done it. So it's there. It can help you improve a little bit. I look for it maybe earlier in a horse's career, the horses that maybe haven't started a whole lot, that are still learning. I mean, imagine being a first-time starter, you're on the track, you don't know what's coming. Maybe you've even worked with company with a couple other horses. Like, you have no idea what's coming. 10 horses in a race, first time out. They're going to have some learning to do, depending on their conditioner, what the goal is, et cetera. But there's some jockeys that they're beat first time out, and they will be very particular about asking that horse to make a lead change through the stretch, to say, okay, you still got to learn how to do this, right? So you can see, like, Mike Smith's great at it. His horse is beat and is run first time out, and horse is beat, and he's kind of weakened. He's in a non-threatening position, and he will take time to help the horse to change leads. Like, hey, you have to do this. This is the learning moment for the race. You're beaten, fine, but you got to do this. Right? So some jockeys are good at that. Some jockeys actually hurt horses, demanding that they change leads, in my opinion. They throw this cross, and the horse lugs in. They literally pull the horse to the left, trying to get him to switch over to his left, and the horse loses all kinds of momentum, and then he almost has to re-rally in the stretch to get his speed back up. So it can actually, you get a jockey that he's demanding. Kent DeSormo is one of my favorite ever, but I mean, that guy would drive me nuts coming off the turn. And he's like demanding that this horse switches instead of just letting him run on his own and maybe being a little bit more gradual and deliberate with that. Flavian's brilliant. I just love this guy. If a horse is running fine, he will not bother with it. He'll be very subtle with his hands, and if a horse doesn't do it, he'll get him going. He'll almost drive him to the right a little bit, and then he'll try again subtly to the left. But he's not like, hey, you have to do this. So you get to know the riders as well, and see how they do it. And it's easier to do it when you're in front. So if you're in front and you don't change leads, that's a problem. If you're coming off the turn and you're closing, it's more difficult to change leads. So you have to be willing to be a little bit flexible. Okay, it took them a little while to change leads. It's totally different when you're working your way through the traffic and around horses than you are in front. In fact, I used to be a big fan of Jessica Pfeiffer when she was in front, and her horses always changed leads perfectly. And I think that was why, is because she was in front typically. Her horses that were performing well were, she was leading, and they always changed leads like a clock. Off the turn, boom, changed leads perfect. So, that's worth considering as well.
What do the riders do to get the horse to change lead? How can you tell when they're asking to change leads, and how can you tell when the horse changes lead? If you're watching in real time, and you have never ever looked for this before, if I'm a listener out there, how do I look for the lead change? How can I spot it?
And I don't know if I can answer that one. You just kind of got to look for it, so you can see. Maybe watch the race in reverse a little bit. watch the stretch drive after they've changed so you can see the horse. The left horse, the left foot hitting the ground first is what you want to see when you're running on the straight, and that's through the stretch. So you can see that the left foot hitting the ground first. And when you see that in the stretch, maybe you can back it up into the turn, and you can see that right foot hitting the ground in the turn. It's almost like, a wide receiver making a cut. If I line up on the right side and I'm playing football, and I run my pattern and I'm running a post pattern and I'm cutting over the middle, they don't cut on their left foot. They're planting their outside foot, their right foot, and they're cutting over the middle. And it's kind of the same thing when they're turning. Their right foot is hitting the ground. It's helping them to turn and fight centrifugal force. It's not going to go well if you're trying to move inward and you're trying to lean off of your left foot. So how do you identify? I don't know. I think most people can see it. And I think if you're really looking for it and paying attention, you'll see it. So my assistant once, we were at Santa Anita and we were sitting up in the Eddie Logan. We were watching workouts, and that's actually really easy because the Eddie Logan suite is sitting right on the turn. It's near the 7/8 pole. So you can see the horses working out. And right when they start turning, the horse is going to naturally, he's going to want to fight centrifugal force with his outside foot. So they change. And the ones that are good at it, they change like a machine. They do it perfectly. And the ones that are still learning, they might actually change in the middle of the air and go, okay, oh wait, and then they change. I don't have a good answer for you. What am I looking for? I mean, you just gotta kind of look for it. When you see it, you're gonna know. Oh, okay, I can see it. The one thing I will say about a negative lead change is I do not like horses changing leads in the turn before the stretch. And a lot of times you can see them and they're flipping back and forth. I shouldn't say a lot. Sometimes they do it. And it's a strong negative for me moving forward. Jackie's Warrior was one. If I saw a couple times, in fact, a couple times that he got beat moving forward, I want to say he didn't seem right to me. He was changing leads while he was turning. And sometimes they do it on tracks that have more sweeping turns, and it's not as big of a deal. Like at Belmont, they have the turn is wider, it's more sweeping. But if you have a sharp turn and a horse is changing leads and he's not planting that outside foot, that's a bad sign to me. And I will make note of that. This horse changed this horse, especially for horses taking on more ground. It's not something I want to see. I don't want to see a horse that's not willing to plant that outside foot to fight that centrifugal force. It could be a bad sign. Maybe the horse is feeling a little something and doesn't want that left foot hitting the ground, or his right foot hitting the ground first while he's turning. You get it multiple times. They're flipping back and forth. That's won't go down that rabbit hole too far, but it's not a good sign for me. And you can see it.
All right. Okay, I was just going to say, I was just going to move to, you talked about watching the head on at the start of the race. You haven't spent a whole lot of time on what you're looking for, right when they come out of the gate. You spent a little bit of time, but what's a bad start and a good start, and how does that impact their performance, and what are you really looking for at the very beginning of the race?
Yeah, so I like to see how horses react when they lose their path. It's hard to see which horses lose their path from the pan shot. It's almost impossible. So the head-on gives a good glimpse of that. Do they have open air on both sides? Are they in a tight in-between spot? Are they in a loose in-between spot? You've got to be willing to understand the differences in surfaces. So losing your path is not necessarily as big of a deal on turf. A lot of the horses prefer to race covered up and inside. That's the best way around the course. but it's kind of like what we talked about with horses being in the starting gate, and maybe they've gotten a little amped up and they're kind of burning gas a little bit in the gate before the race. That's why horses that freak out in the gate, they almost never win, right? Because they're burning fuel. Their heart rate goes up, their gas tank goes down. And so when horses break away from the gate and I'm watching a head on, I like to see how they react by taking kickback. You can see the jockeys, they kind of target open air. You know, you can see it at Gulfstream quite a bit. You see guys that they're good at, you might have a loose in between position between a leader and a stalker, and the horse that's drafting in behind, he's not going to follow. He's not just going to decide to eat dirt, right? They don't want to do that. As you'll see after the race, when horses come back to the race, their nostrils are covered in dirt. You can see the guys taking wet sponges and they're literally like scooping dirt out of the horse's nostrils. They're not just hitting it in their face and they get discouraged by it. They're breathing it. It's not a good thing. So you can see the riders, they target open air into in-between positions, which is much better than just taking all of that kickback. But then the tight in-between position, it's a stressful position. The loose one, it's less stressful. So even if a horse isn't necessarily losing ground, those competitive positions, they're important to make note of, because it's not always about trouble. It can just be a bad spot. It can just be a bad spot where horses are in lockstep down the backstretch or early, and they're eyeballing one another, and they're competitive, and they're eyeballing one another, and they're in a tight in-between position. That's important to note, because that can speak to a horse's gas tank, and it can absolutely have an impact on his performance and results in that race. Look, two wide and 3 wide and 4 wide, all those positions, that they're not the same, right? 3 wide is not 3 wide is not 3 wide. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you 3 different scenarios. Let's say you are the widest of 3 and you're stalking. So you've got a leader, a stalker, and then you've got a lineup of 3, and you're the widest of those 3. That's 3, and you're 3 wide. Okay? Just take a mental snapshot of this, and then do it to where, okay, now there's a leader and a stalker, and you're all by yourself, and you're 3 wide. You know, how does that look now in your head as for the horse's comfort level? Probably a lot more comfortable. Now you've got a leader and a stalker, and you're the 3rd from the outside in a lineup of 4 that's following the leader and stalker. And so now you're dealing with an in-between position, and let's say it's a tight in-between position. You know, how does that stack up in your mind compared to the first 2? Right? So stress is important. You know, it's probably a bad term, but they're kind of fighting, right? They're competing, and you want less stress while you're competing. You want your heart rate as low as it can be for as long as it can be. And the more stress you're putting on, you know, during the race, you know, it can absolutely have an impact. So all those things, you know, they're not going to be, you know, you may not see anything in a running line. You know, comment might say 3, 4 wide tired, something like that. But, you know, maybe you're targeting an in-between spot, and you've got a jockey that maybe he's not great. You know, that happens. It's no big deal. I'm not trying to dig on jockeys, but maybe he's not the best rider. Okay. And he's targeting that in-between spot the whole time, where you got 2 horses and they're like 3/4 of a length in front of you, and you can see it on the head on. And he's almost like coaxing into that spot. Like, why would you do that? Don't do that. You know, get your horse to relax. He's going to be more relaxed. He's going to have more fuel if you'll just idle and let those horses get away from you by a length and a half or 2 lengths. That's okay. Like, that's going to have a direct impact on your fuel. And, that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for on the head-on is, the tight in between, the loose in between. If you're wide, are you by yourself or are you stacked wide? Being stacked wide is way worse, even if it's the same exact path. If you're 4 wide and there are 3 horses stacked to your inside, that's way worse than just being 4 wide. It's like not even close. Because when you start turning, you've got to be super accurate with how you're progressing through that turn. And it gets even worse when you're in between horses. You've got to have a real skilled jockey with very quiet hands guiding you through there. You don't want any contact, no brushing, negative movement. That one negative little bump can cost you a neck. And then all of a sudden you're trying to earn that back and you're burning fuel to earn it back. Trying to emerge from in between horses is not easy. There's a reason why horses don't do it well. It's because they're competitive. They see each other and they want to win and they're trying to hold you off. They don't, progressing in between is difficult. And all that stuff is best seen from the head-on. You can see it on the pan, but I'd like to toggle and combine both views. When you start toggling, it's like, oh, that's cool. I can see that happening in this horse. Did it well or didn't do it well. It's a lot easier to pass from in between when horses are stopping through the stretch. You might see that weaver and you go, whoa, that was impressive. Okay, it was, but the pace was fast too, and they're kind of backing into them a little bit. In the far turn, when the real running starts going, when you see the horse emerge from in between horses, that's way more impressive, right? Than any other part of the race. It's more impressive than when they do it early because everyone has a lot of fuel early. And it's more impressive when they do it late, when some horses are backing off. And it's accentuating your late run. When everybody's trying, when the pace really starts percolating in the far turn and you start emerging from in between horses, it's noteworthy. Even if they kind of get a little bit late and they get tired, they showed you something by doing it at a stage of the race when everybody was trying to be competitive. So, but head-ons are uber important, and some tracks you literally have to watch the head-on the whole way because you can't see anything else because they don't give you too much of a view. And sometimes even the ones that do give you the pan, they're so far back, you can't really get a good view of what the jockey is doing. His hands, his legs. I like to look at this more rabbit holes, but jockeys ride with their legs. Most people look at their arms, they ride with their legs. All the good ones do it. Go watch Irad, go watch Manny Franco, go watch Flavien Prat. They ride with their legs. Their legs are shock absorbers. When they start riding, they do it with their legs first. They're literally trying to remove their weight when the horse is hitting the ground, and they get this rocking motion and they get them going a little bit. And then it evolves into their hands. And you've got to get the production of the crews in horse racing is super important to me. That's why you might see me ranting on Twitter. I'm sure I've made enemies complaining about it, but it's like, hey, I want to see this stuff. I have to see this stuff. I want to know what's going on. And it's because it's the most valuable to me. Anybody can pick up a racing form and be deceived. I don't want to be that guy. I want to be able to see the jockey's hands. I want to see his legs. I want to see the head-ons. I want to see the pans, all of it. It's all super important. I'm rambling again. Go ahead.
No, anything else on the riders that you're looking for that you haven't already touched on, in terms of what they're doing on the horse and how that translates to what the horse does?
Well, nothing that's probably not going to get baked into the price. So I have my guys that I think are brilliant and smart. Intelligence is huge. You can tell who has a plan and who doesn't. You just have to, the beautiful thing about trip handicapping is you have the luxury of hindsight. You know the results going in. You know who the correct targets are. At least from an odds perspective, what the public said was more logical that day. So you can, and I'm assuming the jockeys have an understanding of that also. At least the good ones do. You can tell who's following the correct horses and who's not. I mean, some riders, like I do want to speak about one rider. This guy, I don't know what the deal is with Prat. He gets so much shade. Let me tell you something. In my opinion, and it's just my opinion, and people are going to think I'm nuts, I actually think he's the best rider I've ever seen. And I'm not that old. I still think I'm pretty young. I'm not quite 50 yet. But for me, I think he's the best at everything, full package. And I've learned a lot just watching him ride. He's almost always following the correct horse. Right? So he knows the state, he knows how to ride turf. Right? It's very basic stuff. I mean, just the more elementary points, save ground, do your best not to be a victim of pace and flow. He's obviously really, really good at, but he rides on the lead better than anybody in the country. And it is not even close. It's not close. So you have your speed riders that are good on the front end, but they're just kind of like aggressive and send riders. Prat is unbelievable for many different reasons on the lead. One of them is that he rides early and then he assesses what his horse is doing. And you can see him do it when you watch him. He gets away and he says, okay, what do you want? And then he uses that to his advantage. He's not P-Val. He's not, and I love P-Val. He's one of the best ever. Certainly definitely on speed. But he's not like send. I'm going to be more aggressive and I'm just going to out-aggressive you. And I'm going to beat you that way. He's like, send. Okay, how fast are you? Okay, you're fast enough to get the lead. Couple more niggles. Now I have the front. And most jockeys on the front end, they just measure their lead. Flavien, he knows who his partner is. He talks about their breathing. I just wanted to get him I wanted to get him breathing well. I wanted to get him breathing well in rhythm. And you can tell when he rides, he gets away clean. He assesses. He might make the lead. He lets them get away. And you'll see him do this. Watch moving forward. He lets them get away a little bit. And that accordion flow that I was talking about, he gives them their breather. And the best I ever saw at doing this was Gary Stevens. He would let them get away. He would let them get their breather. And then he had plenty left in the stretch. And that's Flavien on the lead. He rides both surfaces well. He rides speed well. He rides closers well. He's always targeting the correct horses. And there's a reason why he's starting to, the last couple of years, he started to get good mounts. I mean, he's just a brilliant rider. And Irad is good. And I know he's won all these awards. Let me tell you something. It's chess and checkers. Irad is not a good dirt jockey. And I'm comfortable saying that. He's average. He'll out-aggressive you, and he's a bully, and he's really damn good. He's really, really good. But he's not Flavien Prat. And I think it's because he tries to ride the dirt the opposite of the way that he rides the turf. He moves early on dirt. He is almost overly aggressive while wide on dirt. He tries not to take kickback. Look, if your horse is taking kickback, the shortest way around the track is still the best, even on dirt. And Flavien understands this. He assesses his horse and goes, okay, can you handle this? And if he can handle it, he'll stay there. Horses listen to Prat. His horses are never ranked. If a horse is ranked with Flavien Prat, he's going to be ranked for anybody. Some jockeys just are not good partners, and their horses are almost always keyed up. Flavien's are never keyed up. like very, very rarely. And so he understands the advantage of speed. Anyway, I was talking about Irad, like, I don't think he's as good on dirt because he tries to ride the opposite of turf. So he tries to be more aggressive. He's okay going wide. He's pretty average on the lead. He doesn't do anything that excites me. Horses aren't getting breathers. He almost always measures his lead. It's always a measured lead. I want a length lead, length and a half lead. And so he's always trying to reserve and then out sprint you versus being more intellectual about his clock, what he feels like is going on up front. But yeah, I'm big on Flavia. I think if he stays healthy, God willing, I think he's going to go down as one of the all-time greats. And he may never win an Eclipse Award, for whatever reason. But I think he's that much better than everybody else. What was your question?
No, I just was more on the riders. That was good. No, I like the way you contrasted them. The one thing I'll say about Irad is when he was a young apprentice, and I first saw him ride on the turf, he was the best apprentice rider I ever saw on the turf, because typically the apprentices, they're good on dirt sprinters that want the lead, but they're not very good at anything else. But he was just a natural turf rider, and I'd never seen a young rider that could ride like. And I made a lot of money playing his horses on the turf because, you're just getting weight off, and he was probably a better rider than the other jockeys, at normal weight as an apprentice. So, I always thought he definitely was better on turf. He was just a natural turf rider.
He is. I think he's. I wouldn't separate those two on turf. I have my own opinion, but it's one element of racing, and I think he's overbet. I think there's value every time he's in a dirt race. There's value to be had. That's just my opinion. I think he's average on dirt. I really do. When he's riding in big races, you look around who's in those races. Those are good jockeys too. And frankly, some of them are better on dirt than he is. Again, that's just my opinion. But there's a reason why, apprentices, they have to win a certain amount of races before they even let them run on turf, because you're running in closer quarters. It's more dangerous. Frankly, you have to be able to control your horse better. So, if you get a good young one that knows his way around the turf, it's a big deal. And not that I'm trying to throw shade at Irad. He's an incredibly gifted rider. He's amazing. He's awesome. But I don't think that his game is nearly as well-rounded as Flavian. Flavian rides his own horses too. He's not out to discourage other horses. He's just trying to get his horse to the wire first.
So this might be, you don't have to go in a lot of detail, but just what's the biggest difference from at Trip that you'd see from a rider that's not particularly good to one that is? So you don't have to name names, but what is it you normally get from a good rider that you don't get from a bad rider, or vice versa?
It all comes down to intellect for me. Most of these guys can ride, right? They can ride. It's about knowing. It's about having a plan, and I think you can tell who has the plan and who doesn't. And all you have to do is watch a turf race to understand that. Some riders, they are comfortable allowing their horses to do what they want, even at the expense of going wide all the way around in a 2-turn turf race, which is an instant death. They're just okay doing it. And then others understand what's going on, and they will wrangle, take back 2 lengths, knowing that they're going to make up 4 by the end of the race by staying, covered up and inside. It's funny. I've always wanted to do this experiment, and maybe one day I will, but I would love to take a still photo of a turf race, a full field, and I take it to a jockey and say, okay, who's in front? and number them from 1 through 12, or however many horses are in the race, and say, okay, who's in front? And obviously the horse that's in front that's earned the rail and the lead is in front. Okay. The stalker, he's clearly stalking, he's a length back in second. And then you've got a horse that's a half length behind him who's in the pocket. Well, the horse that's in the pocket is actually second. And he might even be first, depending on who the leader is. If the leader's 90-1 and has very little chance of getting to the wire first, you might even say, okay, I'd want to be this guy. And just number them 1 through 12. So that's the difference maker for me, is the intellect. And to go, okay, I may be in 5th in mid-pack, but I'm following the pocket. I'm probably 3rd right now. And actually, these horses are lined up too wide. I know there's going to be an early move made, and I know that all I have to do is follow the pocket and do what he doesn't. And I'm just as good. I'm in just as good a spot as he is. The pocket's going to swing out, and I'm going to get my speed up, and I'm going to move inward. And if I find my way through, I'm probably going to win. That happens all the time. I actually tweeted about it the other day. It's just mind-boggling to me how you get smart riders and they just follow the pocket on turf. That's all they do. They're just literally targeting the pocket. And when that pocket swings out, they remain inside, and they almost always find a gap because the pocket has swung out, which has fanned everyone else wide. There's good chance there's going to be plenty of room down there somewhere. And if the pocket stays in and cuts to the inside, then they slingshot off the turn and they try and find a gap to the outside. So it's all intellect. And same thing for dirt. But I think the dirt's more about a good clock and finding no stress, but being intellectual about that as well. It's strange to me that guys that can really ride make moves right when the turn comes. I will never understand that. And maybe a jockey could explain that to me, why they're doing that, but I'll never get it. Because inevitably, 80% of them find trouble. And I'm not exaggerating. If you're 3/4 of a length back and you're trying to split horses, like right when the turn comes, good luck. One of those horses, the horse to the outside, he's going to try and dive inward. The horse to the inside, he might be trying to carry that horse out. Maybe he doesn't corner right away because he's got somebody stacked to his inside and he can't corner when he wants to. So he's a little bit more patient with his turn. And all of a sudden you're in tight and you check out of the race. Or at the very least, you find a stressful spot and you've got to idle and you don't make it through. It's not a clean run through the turn. That's intellectual. Like why do they do that? I don't know. But a lot of them do it. And I'm like, God, who was that? And I look down and I'm like, man, that's just strange to me. Like, he's a good rider. He's winning 14% of his races. He's more than capable. Like, why is he doing that? So that's the difference maker for me is the intellect. They all have their different styles, just no different than, major league hitter, open stances, closed stances, high hands, low hands, whatever. Some batters are having, leg kicks and, a lot of movement. Others are quiet. They all have their different styles, but they can all ride. They're professionals. That's why I'm okay, with giving praise and giving negative feedback sometimes because they're pros. Like, they should be able to deal with it. And, I think the world of them. They're putting their lives on the line every day. But beyond the skill level, the brains is that's what wins races. A lot of these guys are the same. And the smarter guys win. It's chess and checkers. That's what it is to me.
So you've talked quite a bit about dirt and turf and sort of the difference between, what's a good trip on turf and dirt. And a lot of that has to do with kickback and pace. But what about synthetic? That seems to vex a lot of people. It's different than either one. Is there anything different you're looking at and on trips on synthetic? Anything that's different about flow or pace? Anything that you've learned from watching races about synthetic that you could share?
It's kind of a mutt that leans more towards turf racing. It's kind of a hybrid. I think that in terms of the pace and flow, it's definitely more like turf. But it's also weird because the pace and flow is accentuated on synthetic. I don't know why, but it's accentuated. Like a slow pace on synthetic, it almost seems to me like it's the biggest bonus of them all. A slow pace on synthetic, I think the winner is going to outrun the pocket. The leader, rather, is going to outrun the pocket. Whereas on turf, a slow pace, the pocket is, you still stand a really good chance. But, a slow pace on the synthetic, if you're in front, that's to me, it's almost the biggest advantage because for whatever reason, the pace and flow are accentuated. That's just my opinion. I don't have any data to prove it. It just seems like that's the way it is right now to me. If I'm watching a race and I'm like, man, they're really going slow. Like those aren't coming back. Those horses aren't coming back. And they sometimes on dirt, they stall. They can stall. The stretch runners that are allowed into the race on dirt can win. You get a leader that maybe doesn't get away at all, and he's not coaxed to put everybody into chase mode. They can get run over. It seems to me on synthetic that it doesn't happen. And there's a slight element of kickback. You can see if you watch the head-ons on synthetic, you can see those guys. They're jockeying to move into open air positions, right? If you've got a leader and then you've got a horse that's prompting that doesn't want to engage that leader and he's kind of running 3+ wide to kind of help him to relax, not to eyeball that leader. You'll see the horse won't remain in the pocket. He'll move 2+ wide and he'll target that open air. So there's kickback coming. But it's not nearly as bad as dirt. So it's kind of like that hybrid mutt that I was talking about. It's a little bit of both. Yeah. I don't know if that helps, but it's the best of both, I think.
So
that's all I got.
Other than the accentuated pace, do you think it works the other way too? If it's a fast pace, it tends to collapse more than it would normally on.
Yes, I think it does. I think horses, running fast on dirt, you can get horses that run fast on dirt and they hold sometimes more often than the other surfaces. On the synthetic, I think it's the opposite of that. They cave and they can cave badly. So, and on turf, it's less. Far less. You can still get those. Speed can still win by going fast, but it doesn't happen nearly as often as it happens on dirt. But synthetic, it seems to me like if you go too fast, you're going to have to be way better than everybody. It depends on the stress up front too. You gotta kind of each race is its own race. You got to look at it individually. I try and I was getting at this earlier. I try and choose my words carefully when I'm talking about what's going on up front in races. Like if I told you, Chris, and I don't know if you've ever noticed this when you're reading our notes, but if I say race too wide and stalked versus he was too wide and prompted versus he was too wide and pressed versus he was too wide and chased. So there's 4 different words between prompted, pressed, or stalked, prompted, pressed, and chased. You're too wide just off the lead, but you're trying to describe 4 different things. 4 different things that are happening near the lead. And I think probably on the synthetic, I would say 3 of the 4 are very bad. And that may not be the case at all on the dirt. If you're prompting too wide on dirt, depending on the pace, if the pace is kind of average, it's probably no big deal. It depends on who the leader is, maybe, and what maybe happens in the second quarter, but not terrible. That's, if I'm playing and my horse is too wide and prompting, I'm okay with it. Depending on what the splits look like and what I think's happening, how strung out the field is. If I'm prompting on synthetic, I'm cringing. I'm like, man, I wish you'd just back off a little bit, or that horse would just let you go or something. I don't know how you feel about that, but I don't like that at all.
I'm kind of the same way on turf. On the turf,
yeah,
on turf,
yeah, and it's more that way on turf as well. But those, I feel like if you're slow on turf and you're prompting, it's not terrible. Like, you have a good chance. Like, if you're going slow and you're prompting, it's no big deal to me. It's not terrible. Again, it depends on who the leader is, which I talked about earlier. The leader's no good. It's almost like you're leading. Like, I almost kind of ignore that. Hey, the horse is, hopefully he's no good, and I can move around him at my own will, and then I'm just trying to hold everyone off. It's almost like you were just leading, but not on the rail. On synthetic, I almost never like it, because someone's going to make an early move, and it's just, I don't know. I'm always cringing, like, And that's actually a good barometer for when I watch races. I try and imagine almost if I had action in the race, like, how would I feel if I had this? I wouldn't like that. I don't like that spot. Or I do like this spot. I'd be okay with this.
Sort of the intuitive trip handicapper.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't know. They just, everyone's different, but I feel like we're pretty good at it. And most of the time, I have a feel for how it's playing out, both good and bad. And you just try and, do the best that you can and know that you're going to be right more than you're wrong. I think we're right most of the time. Nobody's perfect, but yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, you can't. I was going to say on the 2-path, because I'm with you. I'm same. On the dirt, usually the 2-path, in second on with a, where you're on the lead, you're either, even if you're pressing or prompting, that's not a bad spot. But for me, and in turf or synth, I don't like that spot at all. They just don't usually win those races. The leader might win, but the one sitting second probably isn't. And probably both of them are in trouble, but unless they're going really slow.
Well, that's the thing. So you're not going to know unless you that's the luxury of hindsight. And so that's when we're writing, we have that luxury. And so if they've gone slow and you're too wide and you're a half back, and if your horse is relaxed, if he's not tugging his way along and the pace is slow, like, that's a good spot. There's nothing wrong with that spot at all. Everyone else is against it. They're running uphill, and you might have a little bit of stress involved, but it's still better than when that pace starts to pick up and you're getting fanned wide and, everyone's taking a shot. Slow paces are 2 people benefit, the horses in front and the ground savers. It's not terrible to, follow the pocket from 4 lengths back on a slow pace. It's not terrible. But yeah.
So here's a hypothetical. It's a dirt racing. You have 2 kind of equal horses and they're in a speed duel. What's better, to be on the rail or in the 2-path?
Between those 2 horses?
Yeah. Which one would you rather have your bet on? If they're dueling and they're basically equal in ability, and one's on the rail. This is a dirt race, and one's on the rail, and one's, sitting just outside that one.
I'd rather have the horse on the outside.
All right, and why would you rather? So, what is it that would make that a better spot? Because you're obviously giving up some ground.
Yeah, you are, but the ground isn't as important on dirt as it is on turf, and there's open air. That horse has open air to one side, and the leader does not have open air. He's got the rail to deal with.
So it's like a horse comfort kind of thing.
Yeah. I wouldn't want either of them.
Burning quite as much.
I wouldn't want either of them, but
right.
if you said pick one, I'd rather have the outside horse because he's got open air to his outside. Like, look, if you're more aggressive and you put a neck in front, that horse on the inside he's buried. Like, what's he going to do? And you have options if you're dueling. Like, you can try and take a breather and relax. You can try and idle a little bit. And if you fall a length behind while idling and trying to, let's just say, you're trying to give a little bit of a breather, you've got open air to your outside. You can still win. You can still perform well. If you fall half length behind or a length behind at the rail, you're absolutely buried. Like you're done. And that eyeball stress, I mean, you've got the rail to deal with, right? There's a fence there. It may not be a horse, but you're stricken to a specific path. You have no options. At least you got a little bit of open air on the outside. And, I wouldn't want either of them anyway. I'd be looking for the horse that has open air coming from off the pace.
Okay, so a couple other sort of more specific questions. What about post position, like drawing the rail or drawing the extreme outside? Does that factor into the notes you take? I mean, by definition, is that rail spot more stressful? Or, anything about post position you want to talk about? Well,
I do. Everyone moves inward, right? So that's the head on that we talked about earlier, where I like to watch for a little while to see what happens. And when horses are moving inward, if you don't have a clean path, jockeys like to breathe. And so a lot of times they'll pause. And it may not be a trouble line, but they can easily suffer a mild shuffle, which gets them a little bit out of position. That can be accentuated. It can happen multiple times as horses are moving inward. A lot of times the starting gate, they'll start near a gap, and you can see horses that make a left-hand turn out of the gate because there's no fence there, and they literally will break inward towards the open air. Who was it? I think there was one that happened this weekend. I think it was Prat's horse made a left-hand turn out of the gate. Was it Miramati? Who rode Miramati? Anyway.
It seemed like there were several horses from the rail and on that day on sprints that were getting away slow and ducking in. So I thought 3 or 4 of them, I think.
Yeah.
The same thing.
So Pimlico starts, there's a gap there. And so the rail horse doesn't have anybody to his inside. So he has he's got a clear view of that open air. And that's all it takes is, a horse to see that and think it's his target. And especially if they've never run there before. And, then you're really chasing, you're stuck behind the 8 ball. I don't, as a player, I get, I don't think about that when I'm playing. Like if I liked a horse that had the rail draw, I wouldn't say, I'm not playing this horse because he's drawn the rail at Pimlico and, he might veer left. That's not what I do. I mean, you have to take that and maybe you say, I'm not singling this horse, but if you like him, I'm not gonna fade him because of it. But it's something to consider. But as a trip handicapper, you have the luxury of hindsight, and that's what we're doing. Is writing about their previous races and saying, hey, there's potentially some upside here because this happened, and even that half step. So look, some of the best trips I've ever had and scores that I've ever made were based on early action and the first 100 yards and nothing else. Where a horse is off a half step slow, you can see he's recovering and he's got speed. And then a horse moves inward and the jockey grabs a hold and he's cautious and he gets shuffled. And that's it. And he hates kickback and he doesn't run. And it's like there's nothing in the trouble line because he didn't check out of the race. He just kind of had to idle and then he paused. And it wasn't like, but if you're paying attention, you go, you know what? He was recovering for those 2 strides. I could see him. He was going to blast off. I know it. I know he's faster than what it shows on paper. I know he was going to blast off, but he couldn't. And, so that's important because you might get a horse that, you look on paper and go, oh, he was 10-1 morning line. He went off at 14-1. He wasn't really bet. He wasn't bet terrible. I mean, he's 10-1 morning line. But he has speed, and the next time, second time out, he might be even bigger than that. He's just kind of hidden. But those are the ones like the one we just described with a rail post. That horse that has speed and he kind of gets dropped on a little bit. Those are, I love those. Those are gold because you're going to outpace the times that you're wrong just based on the odds. You might find 10 of them and, maybe only 1 or 2 of them win. But they're just bigger numbers because nobody's doing the work. Everyone's looking at the running line, Most people, anyway. I'm not gonna say nobody. Some people kind of geek out on it, like me, and they do the work. But generally speaking, they don't like it. Even we have a lot of people they don't like reading the notes. They just scan and look for upgrades and downgrades, and they just play blind, which I don't recommend. We're not making picks. All we're trying to do is say, hey, this one could have run faster than he did. And this one probably had everything go his way, and you might want to pull him back a little bit. So we're not making picks, but it's all we're trying to do is do the work so that the people don't have to. And if you're not willing to read a note that takes 15 seconds, you're definitely not watching a replay. And then we've got a lot of people yeah.
No, keep going.
Go ahead. I was going to say we have a lot of people that they scan. They scan the upgrades and downgrades, and they might focus in on 10 replays that they want to watch and say, okay, do I agree with these and do I not? And can I fade these and can I play these? And so their replay work went from 2.5 hours to 20 minutes, which is pretty cool. Really cool.
And that's my lead in is how much time does it take you to watch a race typically and do all your note taking? I mean, how much? So this is for people thinking about doing themselves. What's the expectation around time?
Mm-hmm. Well, my time budget is going to be worse than everyone else's because I've got to do a lot of prep work in advance of the actual trip handicapping, watching all the tapes, right? So you've got to assess all the pace. I've got to put everything into the database. It probably takes me 3 hours about, depending on the card. Like a huge card like Derby Preakness, it might take me 5+ hours to prep the card and just assess pace and just inject the dates and things like that. So that doesn't even count. As far as the replay watching goes, if I am hauling, like really moving fast, I'll do between 8 and 10 races an hour. And that is just like really cooking. Like I'm in good rhythm, no distractions, clicking super fast. I mean, if you saw me, you'd be like, what is going on right now? It looks like a video game because I'm just like, boom, copy, paste, inject that, head on, toggle, go back, look at the results, toggle, pan shot, head on. It's pretty, I'll fast forward it once, as fast as I can just to get an idea of the flow. I mean, so to do it correctly, if you want to watch one replay correctly, you should watch both views, and it should take you 6 or 7 minutes to do it perfectly. And some of them, you might get a horse, he's detached and last, and there's really, there's nothing, you can move on from those. I don't like to do that because I like people to know that I'm doing the work, that I'm not skipping. I'm huge into pride of ownership. I never want anybody to say, you missed this. It's happened 2 or 3 times in however many years, where someone say, hey, you missed this. I missed a gallop out once that, and I missed some subtle trouble a couple times, but, for the thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, it's acceptable. But I'm pretty big into doing it all. If somebody wants to do it and do it right, I would say, several minutes for one replay.
All right. So kind of follow on to that. This is for the people who are trying to do it themselves. What's, are some good tools to capture it in? You said you used to use Formulator. Would that be if you were going to tell somebody, well, I want to start keeping track of notes, and they use Formulator, is that the place to do it? Is there other
Formulator is good? Formulator is good because you can inject your own notes into there. And, they've got a race note, and you can put a race note in there. Running lines can be very deceitful. That's why I hate them so much. I hate the PPs because I think all they do is lie. I think they just paint a terrible picture. It's a monopoly, and it's the worst monopoly on the planet. And, but you can inject your own notes, and they're like, hey, you've got a runoff leader, and the pace is going to look fast, but it really wasn't because that horse tripped the wire, nearly 2 seconds faster than everybody else. So you can put a race note in there, right? So that.
Just one clarification. When you say running lines, you mean the comments in the charts? Is that what you mean?
No, I'm talking about the actual running lines themselves.
PP running line, like first by 2, third. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Those are just deceitful. They're just, they lead people to making decisions that they wouldn't have made if they'd have actually watched the replay. Right. So let's say, for example, I talked about U.S. time form, how highly I think of it. I think it's the best thing out there. So let's say you look at that and you don't watch the replay, and the pace is, let's say the pace is fast. It's fast throughout. It's coded red all the way across. And not only is it coded red, let's say it's excessive in that it's coded red. For example, let's say most people that don't use it, they're not going to understand. Let's just say it doesn't matter. The pace is very fast. It's coded red, and it's fast. And you don't watch the replay. And you look at your horse, and it says let's say there's 10 horses in the race, and the running line reads like, 10th by 12, 10th by 12, 8th by 9, 4th by 5. And the comment in the PPs says 3, 4 wide, not enough. And you're like, okay, I'm going to handicap this race. I'm not going to watch the replay. I'm just going to handicap the race. And you go, wow, fast pace. He's near the back. That was a good thing. Wow, he didn't go terribly wide. I mean, horses had to have been backing into him. They only went 3 or 4 wide. And 3 horses beat him to the finish. Yeah, it's not very good. Okay, now let me just tell you that there was a runoff leader by 6 or 7 lengths now. You didn't watch the replay. You don't know that there was a runoff leader by 6 or 7 lengths. And yes, he was only 3 and 4 wide, but the rest of the field was very compact, and he was with the outer flow, and he was just unable to gain on horses that also had plenty left. That running line is just so terribly deceitful. You've made a bad decision. And frankly, the computers, they didn't like your horse either, because they've got pace analytics built into it. It was a fast-paced race, so it should have been run fast, right? Fast paces yield fast races, right? So the faster you go, typically, not every time, but typically, if the pace is fast, it should yield an overall fast run race. So all the analytics are coming back that your horse just should have run better. So now you've missed that the trip actually wasn't good at all. It was a bad trip, and he ran well. The only 3 horses that beat him to the wire, they benefited because they were inside, and maybe they covered a little bit less ground, but they were closer to what actually in the race within a race they were doing. They were in a good spot. So your horse might have run just as good as the winner. And there's value on the tote board because none of the computers would have identified that that was a bad trip. Like you're in the worst of both worlds. That's what I'm trying to do is beat the analytics with good subjective information. Once again, Chris, I've forgotten your question.
No, you answered the question.
Okay.
you answered it.
This is what happens. I get on a tangent. I just keep going.
Well, I mean, no. So let me ask a couple other quick questions, and then I'll let you go because this is great. I could talk for a lot longer, but I feel bad when I keep you on this long.
No, I'm good.
Track bias.
Yes.
Sounds like you try to assess that and factor that in. How do you assess that? What are some of the, pitfalls or benefits around bias? And you don't have to go into the whole, a whole soliloquy on it, but just some of the main points, with regard to bias and trips.
Some people think that biases are just kind of hogwash. Not me. I think they exist. I think they're real. Pick Six Paul on Twitter is Paul Cush. I think he's one of the best tournament players I've ever met. I think he's brilliant. He and a friend, they assess a lot of the biases for me. He was actually one of our original authors. And unfortunately, he, like many others that have tried, realized that it was just too hard and took too much time, and he couldn't stay on. So he had to kind of break up with us, so to speak, but we're still great buddies. And he shares with me his bias information. Every once in a while we'll disagree. And of course it's my company, so I can do what I want. And I'll obviously, side with my opinion, but biases are subjective. But there are certain things that I look for in a bias, to kind of assess them. One is, again, luxury of hindsight. I don't have to make an assessment at the beginning of the day. I can go back later and decide based on things that I believe are factors to assess it. I think a lot of biased handicappers look at the results only, and they develop their opinions they embrace the results. And I think that is a potential mistake. Results are a factor, but it's not the only factor. Pace dynamics are a factor. I think if the track is faster, speed tends to hold more. And that's when you get these moving sidewalks where pace might be fast. And horses not only plod along and win that day, but they leave the pack. I think that's a good indicator of a speed favoring service, or at least it can be, is when a pace is fast for certain, and then a horse just runs off and hides. Typically doesn't happen on a fair track, certainly not on a late running track that's more tiring and heavy. So when you get these breakaway winners, that's a factor. that bias in and of itself is more pronounced to me than a late running outside bias for one reason, and that is because of the ground loss. So, for example, if you're a runner and you're trying to close wide on a speed favoring surface, not only are you having to try and overcome the track bias, but you're covering more ground. And that's when I think you get the speed favoring and inside favoring tracks tend to produce races that are more strung out at the finish line, right? So that's something to look for. Whereas the late running outside bias track bring horses into the race that might not have been there otherwise, and you get leapfrog races where, you might get a stalker that he moves early because the other horses are tiring early and he makes the lead, and then he may move inward, and then he gets leapfrogged. And then before you know it, there have been 3 different sequences of horses advancing wide, and you get that kind of, just continuous over the top movement. Now that would be obviously much more pronounced, but a good way to try and assess it at the end of the day, which is what I try and do, and then I'll compare my notes with Pick 6 Paul, is just the fast forward, right? So what the paces were for that race and what maybe should have happened based on that dynamic and the flow dynamic, and then you can move it along quickly. This race ran 3.84, and I identify those horses after the first furlong, and then I zip it through, and I try and identify which path they were on throughout the race. So, I try and look at it that way a little bit. And, I'd like to say that I go back and I reassess things. I don't. That would be the right way to do it, is to say, I was wrong about that one, because biases are totally subjective, right? And I'd like to say, I had the time to go back and say, I had that one wrong. There were 4 favorites that went, there were 6 dirt races and 4 of them went wire to wire. And I had that as a strong front running bias. And, maybe I shouldn't have, because they were just more logical runners. But they went off and won by 5, a couple of them. So I thought it was more speed favoring. But maybe those were just more superior animals. And I don't go back and I change the biases. Where if you were doing it the right way, that's what you would do, right? Just like people that make speed figures or make a speed figure and maybe you get it wrong, you should be willing to go back and change it. But that never happens. People say they do. How many races out of 1,000 races get assessed a certain speed figure, and then, out of that 1,000, how many of them change? I'd say it almost never happens. But I think to do it the right way, you would do it that way. You would do it that way also. But that's what I do. I compare notes with Paul. Yeah, go ahead.
That's good. That was real interesting. I like your strung out field, especially if the front runner is extending its lead even after a fast pace. That's a good tell for a speed bias track, and that leapfrog kind of, I call it a waterfall kind of thing. You just got like continuously the last move wins kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where there's 3 or 4 lead changes in the stretch, all with a different horse kind of thing.
Yep.
That's kind of the tell. I actually think more figures get changed than you think, though.
You could be right. I don't know. I mean, it's just always been my guess.
And it is, because there is some subjectivity and it's hard. I mean, there should be error. Some days the error bars around those figures should be much bigger than others. That's one of the things I always kid Greg Milkowski from Timeform about, is he should put error bars around it. He does the best of anybody. He'll put little codes saying, this one we adjusted, we're not sure. He'll put like things that tell you this maybe is a little more suspect than others. So I think that's good, to kind of acknowledge that. And then he will go back and change them, especially the ones where he was kind of iffy on. He'll, after the horses run back, he'll often, or not often, but if he thinks the data warrants it, he'll go back and update that. So it sounds like, that same sort of thing. So I want to wrap it up with one last question. That would be for people out there that want to try to do what you do, not necessarily professionally, for others taking notes for others, but they want to take notes for themselves, help them be better players. What's kind of the main advice you'd give them if they're trying to do it on their own?
So I would say you've got to be committed, because if you kind of dip your toe in and you're only looking at, let's say 20% of the races on a circuit for a couple weeks, it's not going to do you. It's almost like it could almost hurt you a little bit. You gotta be willing to just stay committed, pick a certain amount of time, and just stay committed to watching the races. Pick out something that you really trust in terms of pace. So I would say commitment, understand the pace dynamic like really, really well, and just stick with those things. And then one last thing would be just stare at that horse all the way around the track. So, stay committed to the process, understand the pace, and, stare at that one horse and have that horse tell you a story, and then kind of branch out a little bit and maybe start incorporating other things. But if you're not committed to it, you're not going to do it well. If you don't understand the pace, you're a 20 handicap at the range that's practicing bad habits. That's all you are. You're wasting your time. And if you're not staring at that horse, you're going to make mistakes also. You can quantify trouble a lot easier just from being in bad spots or, stress levels that maybe he could have felt a lot of stress there. When I bet this horse, would I have been happy? No, he's in a terrible spot. Okay, then maybe he gets a pass, things like that. So those three things, I think, and then you can try and expand on that later. If you decide, hey, this is worth my time, or just, I enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, you're not going to keep doing it, right? So I really enjoy it. I get all geeked out when I'm like, man, this is a good one. Like, I really like this one, and I think I want to take a swing on them and bet very little to make a lot. I mean, that's the goal. You're trying to uncover, the nuggets, and also know that, hey, you know what? 80% of the stuff that I see, I'm not going to be able to use, right? So when you go through and you look at, you're looking at 5 races in a row and you really don't see anything, it's no big deal. That's no big deal. But then you find one, you're like, ooh, that's a good one. I'm going to mark that one down and track it properly. Then it starts to become pretty cool. And then you can expand on it. You start learning. I mean, I think I've learned a lot. And I was doing, I've been trip handicapping my whole life. When I was 16, I was recording, on VHS cassettes, and taking the time to pump them in and rewind to the correct race and watch the race. It was a real pain in the ass. Nowadays, people have no excuses. You've got tools that, boom, you're right there. Formulator takes you to the replay. RTN, I can get through RTN. I can watch, if I wasn't having to inject things into a database, I could watch a ton of tape fast. So people, the time that I'm investing, people can do it much, much faster. Stay committed, understand pace, and, stare at that horse. I think you'd be in a good place. Or just stay, and here's my best advice, is stay super lazy and just go to Trip Note Pros and we'll help you do it.
I was waiting for you to finish it off with, but if you think that sounds like too much work.
Yeah. It is. And let me tell you something,
let us do the work for you.
Yeah, that's my whole deal. So I get on with Jeff Chapman, Chappie, and Skip in LA radio every now and again, and that's my whole thing. It's like, look, stay lazy. Just keep staying lazy, and you'll be in a good place. Just here's the link. Go click the link.
Okay. Anything else before we wrap it up?
No, I'm good, man. I enjoyed it. I always love talking with you. Appreciate you having me on. You're doing a great job. All the ticket writing stuff, and that's the big thing. I noticed I noticed your tweet. You had people chiming in, and one of them was, do you track ROI? We've done very well. Although I have to be honest, this last weekend, I think there were a handful of downgrades that won that it really ticked me off, because normally we don't have those. Normally our big days we do well, and I think our downgrades would have outpaced what we normally do. But yeah, that was one of your questions was, have you tracked ROI? And we do, and I think we've done 2 entire meets with Keeneland that had positive ROI on upgrades, which is kind of, we upgrade a lot of horses because, either mildly or, just a normal upgrade or a strong upgrade. And to outpace ROI today is kind of unbelievable because we're not handicapping. But it's a good starting place for people to go, hey, I want to write a ticket. And what I was getting at is the show that you've done with writing tickets and being intellectual about making good bets, good plays. It's probably just as important, if not more important than what we do. You've got to be smart about what it is that you're playing. Be intellectual about the handicapping, and then be intellectual about writing tickets. And then it becomes fun. I'm not going to say it's fun when you lose, because it's not. It's always way more fun to win. But if you've made a good play and you're wrong, big deal. Move on, and just keep at it. And chances are good that you're going to do better than everybody else. Don't be Irad, which is every race, every track. I used to be Irad. Bet every race, every track, and you're going to be curled up in a ball in the corner of the room with a Kleenex. So appreciate you having me on, man. It's been good.
It's been great. This has been really good. I'm sure the listeners will really enjoy it. I would sum up what you said is there's really 2 things you have to do if you want to be successful long term as a horse player. One is you have to be able to find an edge and know when you have an edge. And that's what we've been talking about on this show, was really, here's one way to get an edge, even in the age of computerized wagering and these teams. If you're willing to do the work, or someone else does the work for you, there's still some areas where you can find an edge. And watching races and trip notes, that's one of those areas. And then the other is, and you mentioned it, some of the other podcasts we've done, is you have to know how to leverage that edge, to make money off it, because you can find the edge, and if you don't bet intelligently, you just waste it, right? So you need to do both. They're both really important, probably equally important.
And enjoy the experience too. I think it's crazy. You got to enjoy the experience. Win or lose, you've got to enjoy the experience. If you're not having fun, go find another hobby. Go buy a pool stick, meet me at the shanty. We can play for $100 a ball. We can do that. But you've got to enjoy the experience. And, if you go buy season tickets to your favorite team, you're not winning, fiscally speaking. You're doing that to enjoy the experience. So if you enjoy the experience, and even if your number at the end of the day is a red number, that shouldn't be crushing you. That's the whole idea of having a bankroll and dedicating a certain amount of money to what I feel is a very worthy pursuit in horse playing and just the sport in general. You're still gonna hit stuff if you're doing it the right way, and churn, have fun, enjoy the experience, win or lose. Nobody wants to get crushed, but everyone's gonna lose every now and again. But be intellectual about this and about the ticket writing, and I think you win. It's almost like buying season tickets. I'm not saying, look, enjoy losing. That sucks, right? Nobody wants to do it, but you just got to understand it's going to happen, and just, stick with it and never get outworked is what I like to say.
Yeah. And, to me, the enjoyment part for most people, not saying everybody, but for most people, you're going to get more enjoyment of it if you do the exercise of trying to figure out what to bet on and how to bet, rather than playing somebody else's picks. And that's why I've never quite understood why, selling picks and giving out picks is such a big part of this game. But I really think, if you want to really get the most out of it from an enjoyment perspective, you want to do your own work and come up with your own selections and figure out how you should bet it. That's where the fun comes. And it's even more fun when you win. And if you do that and you do it well and you're willing to put in the time, you can be successful, despite what some people might tell you. And a lot of that, in terms of you're not a professional, but you're just a fan that wants to become good, is you've got to learn, to choose your spots carefully. You have to be very selective. You kind of hinted at this. A lot of races you look at, you're not going to find anything. Well, a lot of races you handicap, you're not going to find anything worth betting, and you shouldn't be betting those. If you need to learn how, what are the kind of races where you can find an edge and focus in on those, and only play the races when you actually find the edge. And if you do that, you do have a chance to be successful long term, even if you're not a professional or you're not a computer team. And it's fun. It's fun, and you can be successful.
Yep, absolutely. Crumbs the cakes. That's the thing. Crumbs the cakes. You're trying to bet very little and be efficient and smart about it and enjoy it and potentially come home with a little cake or a big one. I haven't had a big one in a while, actually. Yeah, I haven't had one in a while. I'm still waiting for that. But I'm patient. We'll keep doing the work.
Well, and that's the ultimate high, is the big score. If you can make that big score, the king of the world moment that Andrew Beyer talks about, when you figured it out on your own, though, you figured out what was going to happen, and you saw it ahead of time, and you backed your opinion with dollars, and then you cashed big. That's the ultimate high in this game.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. Well, man, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Chris.
All right, thank you. And I was just saying thank you, Ryan. Really appreciate it. And thank all the listeners. And may you all boldly go where no horse player has gone before.